The story begins with young Amber, who works in a butcher shop in the small town of Femfield. Unhappy with her life there, she wants to move to Chicago and talks to a man named Dustin about an apartment she liked. At the end of her shift, her friend Susie calls to remind her about a little party at a friend's house, Ray. Amber doesn't really feel like going, but Susie manages to convince her. Hours later, a man named Keith is closing the convenience store and gets a huge scare when Amber suddenly appears, almost pressed against the glass. Wanting to get in, she points to the open sign and appeals to camaraderie, as they already know each other. Keith lets out a long sigh and eventually allows the young woman in. However, he doesn't move when she brings 6 beers to the counter, as one of the downsides of living in a small town is that everyone knows your age. When Peter and Susie arrive, Keith makes a sarcastic comment about his overtime, but no one pays attention to him. They were with Amber at Ray's house, and she bet she would get there faster on foot than the 2 by car. Peter pays the $5 of the bet, and then goes to the counter to pay for his purchase. Again, Keith doesn't uncross his arms. Peter is a bit older than Amber, but he still has 2 months until he turns 18. Keith is relieved to see Eric arriving and says there is finally an adult in this group. He is also surprised that Amber really ran all the way there, as it is a considerable distance. Then the 4 young people head back to Ray's luxurious house, where he is talking to his girlfriend, Fiona. Privately, Susie tells Amber that she won't be hooking up with Peter tonight. No way. Laughing, Amber reminds her friend that this is what she always says. At the same time, Peter is encouraging Eric to flirt with Amber, despite his shyness. He asks how many girls he has had, and Eric just stares at his friend, responding with silence. Feeling sorry for him, Peter decides to help and suggests a dip in the pool, but things don't go as planned when he asks if Amber will finally loosen up this time. Susie scolds him, and Amber tries to hide her offense by accepting Peter's apologies. He then dives into the water, and the others follow one by one. Still upset, Amber goes to the couch in the living room, and Eric comes right after her. She starts complaining about the town and says she will only be happy once she spends the first night in a big city. Eric attempts to be motivational and tells her she should always pursue her dreams. She really feels inspired by his words, but then she sees what he is really after and gently rejects him. After the party, Amber arrives home to find her mother on the floor, in the middle of a disordered living room. Her father passed away a year ago, but from their conversation, it's clear that her mother had drinking problems even before that. Today, she is so bad that she starts saying things she has never told her daughter, and it is in this unpleasant way that Amber discovers she was adopted. After a nightmare involving a horrific being attacking her inside the house, Amber wakes up to another day of work. The job at the butcher shop is pretty gross, and it affects her so much that it even causes hallucinations where she sees the dumpster filled with arms and legs. She's pulled out of her trance when a colleague calls her name, a bit worried. Growing more stressed, she decides to move next month, but Dustin almost cancels the agreement, saying another tenant came up with a better offer. She insists until he finally gives in on the condition that he receives the down payment the next day. Amber agrees and thanks him, already knowing it won't be easy to arrange a ride to Chicago. Susie is without a car, Ray has already made a mess driving, and Peter's car is in the shop. Amber could borrow her mother's car, but it would be complicated to explain why, as she prefers not to reveal her moving plans until everything is set with Dustin. Therefore, the only one who can help her is Eric, and since he drives a van, the group decides to turn the trip into a collective outing. Amber starts feeling better as they pass the limits of Femfield, but the van breaks down just a few meters later. She is devastated and begins to think the town won't let her leave. Ray and Fiona start signaling to the passing cars, hoping to get a ride. After several failures, a huge truck finally stops and the driver gets out to help. His name is Bernard, and he says that the van's problem is not simple, recommending they call a tow truck. Amber loses her footing at hearing this and starts entering one of her trances again, this time with even more macabre visions. She snaps back to reality with a nudge from Susie, who discovered something. Interesting. Bernard's destination is Chicago. Now all they have to do is convince him to take the group there. He immediately declines, saying he could get fired, but Susie thinks he just wants money. As she goes to collect contributions from the others, Amber explains her situation and seems to move him enough. Bernard says he also left his hometown when he was her age, and it was one of the best decisions of his life. When Susie arrives with the bribe, he tells her to keep it and goes to open the back of the truck. Seeing that the conditions are worse than in the van, Amber warns that no one needs to go along if they don't want to. Everyone agrees to accompany her, except Eric, as he thinks it's crazy to trust a stranger this way. Peter solves the problem by asking Bernard to let someone ride up front with him, in addition to sending pictures of the truck to others, just in case. The driver understands their fear and agrees to these safety measures. Everyone is happy with this luck, and ironically, Eric is the one chosen to go in the cabin. Bernard warns them to knock on the sides if there is any problem, and before locking them in the back, he tells them not to touch the boxes under any circumstances. Thus, the trip continues, and the young people become more comfortable. Curious about the cargo, but lacking the courage to disobey the agreement, Fiona says it could be something illegal. The two boys dismiss the possibility since no one would be crazy enough to take a bunch of strangers along with that kind of merchandise. The conversation is in a joking tone, but Amber seems to be left with a nagging feeling. Sometime later, they are playing Truth or Dare when the truck takes a sharp turn. They start banging on the sides, but nothing happens for several minutes, and it's impossible that the driver hasn't heard. Peter decides to call Eric, but it's not his friend who answers. He is terrified to hear Bernard's voice, explaining that the turn was just to avoid a dog. When Peter asks to speak with his friend, Bernard says he won't because Eric has been asleep for a long time. Then the call gets bad, and Peter can no longer hear anything. Already expecting the worst, Amber suggests they call the police. The problem is, at this point, they don't even know where they really are. Ray tries to peek through the small holes in the metal, but it's too dark, and the truck is going even faster than it was at first. Amber calls Eric's number again and speaks to Bernard, lying that she really needs to go to the bathroom. He responds that they are almost there and asks her to hold on just a little longer. Already growing desperate, she claims someone is very sick and the truck will get all dirty if he doesn't stop right now. In a very calm voice, he says that there is nothing a hose can't fix. Susie calls the police and begins to explain the case when the truck shakes again. When she picks up the phone again, it is no longer working. Fiona begins to smell something strange coming from those boxes, and finally, Susie asks a very important question. What are all those holes in the part of the truck that only carries cargo for? Then, another violent turn knocks everyone down. Reaching her limit, Fiona takes one of the boxes and starts opening it with a knife that Ray didn't even know she had. To everyone's horror, a viscous red liquid sprays out. Peter grabs the knife from Fiona's hand and starts forcing the metal to get out of there, desperately. Once again, he is thrown down by the movement of the truck, but this time it's different, as they also hear the sound of the reverse horn. When they finally feel the vehicle has stopped, nothing can be seen through the holes, and no one makes a sound outside. Susie begins to think that this is all a prank, or part of some TV show where the fun is to scare people. Ray and Peter almost convince themselves that she might be right, but Fiona and Amber seriously doubt it, stating that the energy of that place is very heavy. It is then that the door suddenly swings open, but no one appears outside. After mustering courage for a moment, the young people exit the truck with their flashlights and begin to explore the location, which seems to be some sort of warehouse. Ray shines a light on a drawing on the wall showing a smiling pig and concludes that it must be a slaughterhouse, as his uncle used to own one. Suddenly, a metallic sound begins from the right side of the barn, as if doors are opening. Not knowing what to expect, the group starts to flee in the opposite direction. Peter finds another door with many boards nailed on and begins trying to remove them, while the others hear whispers. The sound comes from above, but from all sides of the barn, leaving everyone confused. Then Ray sees a shadow passing by and barely has time to warn the others. The attack is so quick that no one truly sees what happens, and they only realize that Ray has disappeared due to the fallen flashlight, illuminating a trail of blood. Suddenly, a piece of the boy collapses right in that spot. Everyone begins to scream and looks up, where Ray is still being attacked. Fiona is next, and this time the others can see the figure dragging her by the waist. The thing resembles a man, but doesn't move like one. In addition, it buries its teeth in Fiona and starts sucking her blood. Fiona manages to stab her knife into the eye of that thing, and Peter tries to free his friend from the possible vampire's grip. Even so, she ends up being lifted almost to the ceiling, and the creature bites her neck. Susie and Amber grab her legs and pull with all their might until the monster finally lets go. Peter disappears for a moment, but as soon as Susie is attacked, he reappears with an iron bar and strikes the assailant. The creatures move incredibly fast, and it's hard to see where they are. Therefore, Peter ends up caught by surprise by the neck and meets the same fate as Ray. Panicked, the three girls run back inside the truck and lock themselves in. From the noise of the door, they deduce that the creatures are crowded right there, trying to get in. Moreover, Fiona and Susie are injured and very weak. Minutes later, the noise completely ceases. Everything falls silent for a few moments, and then the door opens by itself again. Amber takes advantage of the calm to grab a fallen bottle and prepares a Molotov cocktail just in time to defend the trio from the first invader. The creature bares its teeth and takes 2 steps inside before turning into a walking bonfire. Fiona runs to close the door while the others attempt to open a side passage. They kick the metal plate until they manage to free it, but Fiona can't join them, as she is pulled under the door and cannot withstand this second attack. One of the creatures manages to get through there and almost comes out of the truck as well, but Susie and Amber hold firm. Exhausted, they walk a few meters and sit down to rest. Amber begins to cry and says none of this would have happened if she hadn't dragged her friends on this trip. But Susie won't let her sink into guilt and reminds her that the ride was her own idea. Furthermore, all involved are adults, and no one forced them to do anything. Suddenly, a series of crashes begins, accompanied by a hellish stench. They don't have the courage to peek, but we see it's one of Amber's visions becoming reality. A mountain of arms and legs is being dumped into a dumpster. After the noise stops, Bernard appears next to the truck, and the two remain curled up to observe him. A woman named Veronica comes from the other side and angrily grabs his throat. Bernard starts apologizing and swears he did the best he could. After she releases him, another man appears with an envelope and hands payment to the driver. Bernard gets in the truck, but Veronica says he can't leave before searching for the 2 runaways all around the perimeter. He tries to protest, but it is evident he is terrified of this woman. After he begins the search, the other man hands Veronica a blood bag and complains that Bernard didn't even refrigerate the food. The two talk about the creatures inside the barn as if they are going through a training session. Then, Susie and Amber feel disgusted seeing Veronica drink the contents of the bag. After that, she takes out a cell phone and seems to call someone, but without bringing it to her ear. The two only understand the reason when Amber's phone starts ringing loudly in her pocket. Veronica smiles in satisfaction while one of the creatures is soon drawn in by the noise. The girls run away until they find another hiding place in the shadows. Then Amber looks up and sees Eric lying down. Susie begs her not to leave her side, but she feels sorry for him and goes over. He is still alive, and Amber manages to untie him. She starts helping him walk to Susie when one of the creatures grabs him, and then Eric is thrown down from above and collapses to the floor. Holding back tears, Amber moves carefully, and Susie does the same. The two meet halfway and continue in silence, slowly going down the stairs while avoiding the creatures. Finally, they reach the bottom, where several vehicles are parked, and hide under one of them. As if they are sniffing them out, the creatures soon spread out there as well. Susie begins to lose hope, and now it's Amber's turn to encourage her, assuring her they will get through this. Just after she says that, Susie is pulled by the legs and dragged away. Amber screams and begins to feel strange, almost slipping into one of her trances again. As she recovers, she gives up on hiding and simply stands up, walking across the parking lot with her head held high. It only takes a few seconds for someone to grab her, but Amber was counting on that. After they roll through the puddles, she manages to restrain her attacker and begins to interrogate him. While he is still, he looks like a normal man, except for his eyes. He reveals that this is a hunting training for his species, and it's not the first time it has happened. Bernard usually brings groups of addicts or other easily fooled people. Then Amber starts screaming, calling for Veronica and warning that she has captured one of her children. She says she just wants to go home and promises not to tell anyone what happens there. No one responds for a few minutes, and she yells again until another creature hits her from behind, freeing the brother. Amber starts running through the parking lot, but she knows this is the first time in her life that she isn't the fastest of them all. The creatures not only outpace her, but also climb the structures like lizards and can jump almost as if they fly. But running is all Amber has now, and she needs to make the most of it. When she finally stops, the creatures seem to have fallen behind, and Bernard is parking near her. While he talks on the phone, Amber grabs the heaviest object she can lift. She attacks him through the driver's window and crushes his head, continuing to strike him even when he is no longer moving. Veronica's voice is still calling for Bernard on the fallen phone when Amber's outburst ends. She tries to start the truck but can't, and one of the creatures comes to attack her again. Amber takes off running once more, entering another barn. She manages to walk quite a bit without getting knocked down, but we see that the creatures are swarming in. They sneak up behind Amber and run to hide. Amber herself also notices that the place is filling up with monsters, but turning back now wouldn't do much good either. Only when she lights a lighter to try to see does a pair leap on her. More too appear when she defeats them, and no one notices the leaking canister. Then the crowd of suckers begins to tighten the siege, and Amber has no more chance to escape. However, at that moment, she simply jumps to the top of the post without taking a run-up, as if she had levitated at high speed. Besides being completely impossible, this leap is very similar to the movements of those creatures. When Veronica appears and starts talking to her in a motherly tone, Amber understands that this final ambush wasn't actually a threat. Veronica knew they were of the same kind as soon as she saw her running, as no human is that fast. All this theater was just a way to show the truth to the newcomer, much more effective than words. Hanging several meters off the ground, Amber has no way to argue, especially since all of this also explains her visions. Crying, she becomes very confused and laments that her friends have died, but Veronica points to the creatures and says those are her new friends. Amber decides to come down and asks Veronica if she is her mother. She says no, as giving birth for the species is so intense that rarely both involved survive. Veronica herself lost her offspring that way, and has been taking care of everyone she can locate ever since. Amber accepts a few sips of blood and admits she feels much better, but Veronica says that's just an appetizer. The real meal is her friend Susie, who comes being carried by two creatures, still unconscious. Amber's disgust at the idea is evident, but Veronica encourages her to overcome her resistance. Just as Susie wakes up, the spilled fuel reaches the flame of the lit lighter. Amber hugs her friend and waits for the flames to spread enough before jumping with her through the window, leaving behind a gigantic barbecue for her new family. But, as she helps Susie walk, we see that Veronica and the stronger ones are merely singed. She doesn't let anyone chase Amber, as she is sure she will come back of her own free will. It is already dawn when Amber and Susie reach the main road. After walking for a long time, the two sit down to rest, and Amber tries to find something to take care of her friend's injury. Susie is almost unconscious when a stranger appears and starts attacking her. Hearing her screams, Amber rushes in and yanks the man off her friend. Then Susie, in shock, watches her friend devouring the stranger. After Amber finishes, she sits next to Susie and swears that everything will be all right.